Hi, I'm Raj Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief at Devex. You're listening to Davos Dispatch, our special edition of This Week in Global Development. I'm here in the freezing cold, snowy ski town in Switzerland for the World Economic Forum's annual meeting, and I'm here to pull back the curtain for all of you who listen to this podcast through conversations with a number of diverse leaders from around the world on some of the most important issues facing the globe today. Listen in and let me know what you think. My guest today is Mafalda Duarte, the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. She's new to the role, but not new to the issues, and is really in one of the most important positions at the nexus of climate and development. In this episode, we'll learn all about her plans for the Green Climate Fund and her perspective on the broader trends in global development and climate change. Here's our discussion.
A lot of people I talk to in this climate world and ask them, what is making them optimistic. One of the things is the fact that Mafalda Duarte has taken over the Green Climate Fund.
Thank you.
I know it's early to say, what are you doing? But what are you doing? What's your plan? Because the Green Climate Fund, we all know in the early going, it had a very slow start. And then it started moving faster, it was improving, now you've taken over, and part of your remit, I think, is to drive that change even faster. Well, what are you focusing on?
So, I came to the job on the back of a strategy that the board had approved, it's a very solid strategy. It talks about the things that we are talking about in the realm of climate. Is how do we mobilize more private sector capital? How do we target the most vulnerable? Those. How do we think about the big transformations, like in the food system, in the transport, so like big system transformations? So that's all. That's what we all know we have to do. And GCF is expected to play a big catalytic role. So the interesting thing about GCF, as I've been articulating it since I'm there, and what I find very interesting about GCF is it has some interesting scale of resources. It has the flexibility. It has more flexibility. We can basically deploy the capital in a really flexible manner.
Any way you want, right?
Yeah.
You can give grants. Just give away the money.
We can do grants. We can do equity. We can do plain equity. We can do junior equity. We can do guarantees. So it's really flexible. We do the entire value chain. So we can provide grants to governments to improve their policy, to improve their strategies, to improve their regulatory frameworks, to convene the stakeholders, all the way to project preparation. So we hear a lot about there are no projects and we need resources for project preparation. There are resources for project preparation that our partners can access to, all the way to then the investment. So I find interesting I think the strength of the fund is that scale of resources, is that flexibility, and then it's this network of partners. Is the fact that we can actually work with governments. Yes, we can work directly with governments, and we can work with multilateral development banks and other international financial institutions, but we can work with private sector, and we can also work with non-governmental organizations. So again, that flexibility. And one of the things that I have been saying is we are not yet... We are just, in my sense, scratching the surface of the potential of GCF to actually make the most of all of the tools that it has and bring some of these partners together. We are here in Davos, and some of the conversations is about how do we bring relevant stakeholders together? How do we bring different types of capital together? Because if we bring the public and the private and the philanthropic together, we cannot, get to the scale and the speed that we need. So GCF has that network. We have more than 200 partners that we work with. And so, so what I'm really excited about is in this new phase is really, on the one hand, working with governments and helping them if they want to be ambitious and put ambitious programs, transformative programs in place in specific sectors or parts of their economy, that we help them bring together the partners and how that different types of capital and value added comes together, and what role can we play in de-risking, in providing grants to that pool. And on the other hand, really working with private sector and innovations on the private sector side. So I was very happy at COP, for example, that we were able to announce really interesting things on the private sector side, which I think are really needed, like our support as anchor investors to a green guarantee company to guarantee issuances of green bonds in developing countries. Or a financial institution that basically brings institutional capital to because this is the thing, even I was in a panel with Ray Dalio twice.
That's a classic Davos thing. You're here with someone like Ray Dalio, the famed hedge fund investor.
Yeah, so I was with him twice, and he's saying that there's all of this institutional capital out there, and it's 0.3% of the 200 trillion that is going for climate. They want to invest, and we need to enable them to invest. I said, yes. This is a conversation that we've been having for a long time about how to bring institutional capital. So one of the things that we've announced at COP again was support to this financial vehicle institution that basically brings institutional capital to provide long-term lending for subnational authorities. Because again, remember, at COP, what was one of the big themes? Subnational. So like cities. How do we drive the urban agenda, urban and climate change agenda? So that, we announced things on basically transforming supply chains for, commodities that are driving deforestation with private sector. We announced also another partnership with one of our partners, an equity fund, to provide energy access to the hardest to reach. This is all private sector. And we have the capability of working directly with those private sector investors, and they come in a variety of ways.
I mean, the World Bank really well because you were there for many years, right? You led the climate investment funds. Obviously, the World Bank has a big reform itself undertaking and a new president, and they are trying to crowd in private capital also for this. So where does GCF fit uniquely in this constellation? Would you work with the bank and the private sector together, and what would you do differently than what the bank does or other MDBs do?
So, we can be, again, enablers of all of them. As you rightly said, I led the climate investment funds for a long time. And it's the same logic. Is we were providing to the MDBs the risk capital, the patient capital, the concessional capital to enable their balance sheets to come and invest in certain projects. The difference between the CIF and the GCF is CIF focuses exclusively on MDBs. GCF has the possibility of actually working directly with private sector. And in my engagements with private sector, Africa, AFC from Africa, that we are a great partner with, they basically invest in infrastructure. They basically do infrastructure investments. They are one of an example. We have several, and the conversation is the multilateral development banks are not providing the type of capital that we are providing, and so we are sort of like filling that gap that the private sector investors are actually feeling, that there isn't necessarily. They often say that we are the only ones actually that come in at the scale and with the flexibility, because the multilateral development banks can't go that far.
Right. Or maybe they can. Maybe there are ways to do it, but they don't. It's not yet where they're...
Let's see. Now, they are going through the reform. The World Bank is going through their reform agenda, and I understand that. And it's, as you said, it's a conversation is quite a lot about how they enable private sector. I think, and I've said it before, and being a long timer in MDBs, because not only I worked in World Bank, but I worked in African Development Bank as well for a number of years. I think there's quite a bit of room for these organizations to work with governments on the policy and the regulatory environments, because we know when we hear from private sector, if we have the right signals, if we have the right regulatory frameworks in place, if there's ease of doing business in areas that are relevant to climate, things can accelerate. So I think, and they are really, when we talk about these areas, yes, a government can go to a consulting firm and get advice, and pay, a substantive amount of resources, which some will be willing to do and can do. Some others might not be in a good place to do. Normally, actually, those are the ones that are not in a good place to do, that need more of the support.
Right. Especially the countries you focus on, which are the least developed.
So I think there is quite, and we are both here in Davos, and I guess you have the same sense that I do. Things are moving fast.
Yeah.
And the things are moving fast on the industry side, on private sector, on the technology side, and I hear the private sector companies here saying governments are not catching up. They have to catch. They are always behind. They are really behind. So I think there's quite a bit of a big space there for the multilaterals to, because that's a natural place for them.
Are you interested in the intersection of business and social impact? Do you want to know how corporate sustainability, ESG, impact investing, and more can contribute to development finance? My name is Advas Aldinger. I'm a senior reporter at Devex, and I've been reporting on these issues for nearly a decade. I'm the author of Devex Invested, our free weekly newsletter dedicated to development finance. Every Tuesday, we explore how companies, investors, and market mechanisms are reshaping the world of development finance. Visit devex.com/newsletters and join us on Tuesdays.
I feel like part of it is, within the World Bank, they can do guarantees too, but that's in MIGA. They can do, they can support private companies and private sector, but that's through IFC. Then they have lots of people inside the main World Bank group that are used to doing sovereign lending to, build a road project or something. And here you're talking about much more sort of innovative things that even the most advanced countries are struggling to get right.
So that, for that reason, I think, it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of the World Bank reform, and also because of what you are saying, because they have these three pieces. It's the main World Bank, it's IFC dealing with private sector, and MIGA on the guarantees. Everybody knows that there's a need for deployment of more guarantees. We are in conversations with MIGA to do more with them as well. So that's going to be but in terms of my broader point is, I think World Bank, and the equivalent in other MDBs, I think, need to double down the efforts on helping governments position themselves from a policy and a regulatory framework to drive climate investments and to catch up with all of the change that's going to go really fast, and that it's coming. And then, I've said it at COP. I was in an event with the heads of MDBs. We are here and very interested in discussing with them how can we be enablers of them in their attempts of unlocking private capital. So we are having some conversations with some of them. What can that look like? Not necessarily on a project finance basis, because that tends to be the default, is to do it on a project finance basis. To come to us and say, okay, give us resources for this particular project in this particular country.
So what do you want to think about? Kind of like a sector basis or an entire industry? What do you mean if it's not project finance?
No, I mean, if for example, they are thinking of some more of a platform to provide guarantees, or if they are thinking of some platform that can tackle the local currency risk, because which is a key issue that we know and is being discussed so that's the sort of think that I'm keen to see how that evolves. But in the meantime, what I'm really focused on in terms of the GCF is continue to do a lot with private sector and innovate, and I just gave you some of those examples. And what I like a lot about these examples, a lot of the funds that we invest in, we are providing them with equity, junior equity. They themselves are investing in local companies. So these are local entrepreneurs that are being supported, that are being given the capital to grow their businesses. So that's a lot. Our agenda is how do we support the local entrepreneurs. In fact, we have big targets in the next 4 years. We in terms of supporting local entrepreneurs, micro and small, medium enterprises in country.
And I just want to make sure I understand this well. So, for example, you might find like a venture capital firm that is ready to invest in small-scale local entrepreneurs, but they can't take all the risk. And they know these are some fairly risky environments to work in for many reasons. So you say, we'll join you, and we'll lose the money first, for what they call first loss, right? And so that makes it less, it doesn't take away the risk completely. The investment could still fail, but it reduces the risk enough, right, that they're willing to go into these markets they otherwise might not be willing to, or invest more than they otherwise would.
No, but they, a lot of these equity funds and impact funds, they want to go into those markets, and they want to work with those entrepreneurs. But it's risky, and so they need partners. And we provide then also a tranche of grant resources for advisory to provide advisory services to the entrepreneurs, because they need a little bit of hand-holding and support. So I think I had seen before. I had seen before quite a bit the power of working with local financial institutions.
Right, they're there. They're on the ground. They have a much better ability to understand the real risks. They don't have the perceived risk that you might find.
And they lend on local currency as well. Exactly. They work in local currency. So I think working with local financial institutions, but then also working with these equity funds, and working with the smaller entrepreneurs. So that's quite important.
Right, because you can't go work with a small entrepreneur yourself. You're too small to be able to handle all those transaction costs.
No. I mean, we need to work with. Already, we work with a number of partners. I told you we have more than 200.
Right.
But
that's why, like a local small bank, they could do that for you. They can be effectively the intermediary.
They can. Local financial the larger financial institute, even small. I mean, we have development banks in our network of partners that are small in terms of size, because they are in small countries, they're small economies, so they are small, and we work with them. So that is really, really important. And then the vulnerability, like the vulnerable, how do we reach the most vulnerable? I know some of our private sector deals aim to do that and are doing that, but not necessarily yet at the scale that is necessary, and in the very difficult countries and environments, like the fragile and conflict-ridden states. What is it that we need to do more of, and which type of partnerships, so that we can reach the most vulnerable? So those are two big priorities. Of course, I know at some point you would you would ask me what more. I mean, when I laid out my vision in September at the UN Climate Summit, I spoke about this. I spoke about private sector capital mobilization. I spoke about vulnerability and targeting the most vulnerable. But I also spoke about making the institution more efficient, and impactful, such that we can manage 50 billion by 2030. So there's a whole agenda, and it's known because our partners also talk to me about that. They talk openly about it. I think oftentimes when we set up new institutions, often it's just the human nature. Is you set up institutions or you set up anything new, and you go and you look at what exists, mm-hmm. and you draw from what exists. But we know that the organizations that maybe we are benchmarking are not the benchmarks that we need. That's
right. That's why you had to set up something new to begin with.
So we really need to think, and it's hard. It's hard for people to think about things being very, very different from what they are used to see in other organizations. But what I'm trying to do, and hopefully with support from the board and other key stakeholders, is to keep people focused on the urgency and the scale. If we lose track of that, right, we are lost.
I mean, some of that's a cultural thing, right? I wonder, that's what Ajay Banga is dealing with at the World Bank too, is changing a culture. Right? He came from a corporation. That's a lot of corporate leaders are very focused on. There's that expression, culture eats strategy for breakfast. What do you think is the culture like at GCF? Is that what you're trying to tweak to put some more urgency into, that operating culture?
Yeah, of course, and these things are all intertwined. If you set up a foundation which is highly bureaucratic, if it's risk averse, in your processes, in your policies, in your processes. By the way, so the foundations, end up being really important. So whatever policies you put in place and processes that you put in place.
Right, those initial structures.
The structure, and then, how you keep building on that over time. Right. If they are anchored on, not the appropriate balance in terms of impact and, opportunity and risk.
Right, impact and compliance, let's say, yeah. Right?
Then, and then you are creating a certain culture.
Right.
So I think if we all, and the same is for everybody, even here in Davos, governments, private sector. Private sector tends to be quite a bit more agile.
Yeah.
But,
Well, they're paid to take risks, right? That's one of the differences. Like, you're a steward of taxpayer money, effectively. And so that you can see why bureaucracies get developed and compliance culture takes over. But as you say, it's a balance. How do you getting that right balance? It's not easy.
No, we don't have the right balance. This is why I come back to, if we focus on the urgency and speed, we will understand that this balance that we've had, or this perception of what's the right balance between, impact and risk, if we continue on this paradigm that we've had in the past, it's very difficult to see how we get to the scale at the speed.
The bigger risk is climate change, right?
Yeah.
We know what's happening.
So that's why. So what is it that people are willing to, in their minds, accommodate in terms of what they might perceive as we are taking risk, to cater or enable for the big impact?
Absolutely.
So that's a little bit, so we have big reforms coming up in terms of, and then, you with some changes in some policies or processes or procedures that we have, hopefully you start driving a different culture.
Yeah.
So it's not a small task.
No, it's not.
And it's not, I'm also trying to convey to different stakeholders, it's not going to happen overnight. But again, because, the science is scary more and more. Yeah. Every time, we hear more from the science. And, when I was actually on my way to Dubai and looking at what the latest science is, it's pretty disconcerting that, some of the scientists that actually I studied with, that were my professors, when they say that we might need to be carbon neutral by 2035 and not 2050, and we might actually breach the 1.5 in this decade, then
that's scary. That's scary.
It's so we need to be prepared to do things differently. We need to be prepared to take on more risk. Because at least we have a chance if we do that. If we go at the pace that we are going right now, we will not have a chance.
Now, your organization is unique in a few ways. One, you talk about the flexibility, et cetera, but you're also you're the only one that's focused really on the least developed countries and really looking at adaptation for places, for countries that they're the ones who are really most upset with the current reality that they didn't cause climate change and they're dealing with the brunt of it. What about your role as a leader of this institution and of this issue? Should we expect to see you more as a spokesperson for this and out there, vocal advocate? Obviously, you come from a finance background. In the end, this is like a financial institution, but it does feel like we need activism too. Are you going to be, and you've just been in this job a few months, are you going to be more vocal yourself?
I see myself, I at some point in my career, quite a number of years ago, and I was doing my development career. And when I basically encountered I saw actually the impacts of climate events. Then and they triggered my curiosity, and I studied the science, a little bit of the science, and then at that point in time, because at that time when I looked at it, the science was still like some scientists saying, well, this, but also this, and so it was a little bit difficult with, on both sides of the debate, credible scientists to really make up your mind. If you're just exposed to information, at a very general level. So I basically decided this is my career now. This is what I'm going to, dedicate my efforts, because then I merged two things that I care deeply about. One was, the poor, and making sure that the poor, that we eliminate poverty and that we support the most vulnerable. Then I merged that with my next, of course, something that touches on our hearts if we are parents, right, which is the future of my children, my three daughters. So I have been a big champion of this agenda. Can I become more vocal and be more of an activist? Yes, I can. But I will do it if, in my assessment, that's what's necessary.
Yeah, well, it is an important moment for you and for GCF and for everybody. And I don't know, this is your first Davos, I think, right?
This is my first Davos.
Yeah. How do you feel like coming here? Do you walk away? I know you just had a meeting with the Minister of Finance. You're probably meeting lots of, investors, apparently Ray Dalio and others too. Like, what do you take away from the experience here?
I think, so what I have found interesting, and also, why I took a keen interest in coming, and I'm here by myself.
No entourage.
No entourage. Was because, they end up bringing the most prominent topics of the day and, that we are confronted with. So this year we have these 4 topics: security, of course, nobody can dispute that, jobs and growth, climate, and then technology, AI, and all of the technology advancements. So I was intrigued in coming here. Of course, you always take advantage of these gatherings because you end up, as it is an opportunity to meet a lot of people that are relevant.
Especially the private sector, right? And yes. This is a key place for that.
So from that perspective, it's worthwhile. But even from a perspective of trying to see, okay, what's the debate? And how are these things intersecting in the debate? Because I think we need, and I was in a great discussion on health and climate. I've been a big champion of health and climate for a number of years. And it has been a frustration not to see more emphasis on climate and health because everybody cares about health. And if we just make all of the relevant stakeholders and citizens understand that unless if we tackle climate, you are going to be exposed to much more health problems than even you are today. And already today you are because of climate. But we are not making these, we are not using this lever. Security is another big lever. If people just understand that, it is not sustainable what's happening right now, that, we have migrations, big migration movements happening. This is just going to increase. If we understand that a lot of the climate-related events are drivers of conflict, this needs to be more talked about. So I was intrigued about, how are we talking about, how are we bringing these different dimensions together? And I think there's room, at least in my limited exposure of Davos, I think there's room to do more on the cross-section of these topics. Because one of the things that I think, we need to do is really be crystal clear to the people. Because the people they are consumers, they are producers, they are investors, they are voters in democracies. We need to be crystal clear that they need to be empowered with the information. And right now, I'm not sure, as a matter of fact, I can tell you, that I think that many of the people that needed an understanding of the linkage between climate and health and what's coming their way, and security and climate, and migration and conflict, I think there's a long way to go.
I agree. That narrative's not there yet. But hopefully this kind of conversation and what you're doing here will help to build it. I got to let you get back to the annual meeting, but thank you so much, Mafalda Duarte, for being a part of this.
Thank you, Raj. It was
Great
a pleasure.
to see you as always.
Good seeing you.
Thanks for listening to Davos Dispatch, a special edition of This Week in Global Development. If you enjoyed today's episode, and I sure hope you did, please share it, or you can also leave us a rating or a review. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform, and I'd love to hear what you think. Feel free to shoot me a message on social media at Raj_Devex, or send an email to podcasts@devex.com. Davos Dispatch is a podcast from Devex, and it's hosted by me, Raj Kumar. Today's episode was produced and edited by Naomi Mihara.